And now, as ever, to the papers. Lots of different stories on the Sunday papers. Everyone very interested in Six Nations. Scotland playing wonderfully, I have to say, yesterday. Well done, Scotland. The Sunday Telegraph has gone pursuing, like a dog with a bone, the Iraqi witch hunt story. Remember the lawyer who was struck off this week. Then on the Mail on Sunday, they have a story about Nigel FARAGE and a friend of his. I'll say no more about that at the moment. And some fruity emails involving David Beckham and his campaign for knighthood. The Sunday Express has the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Carey, defending Trump and blasting his critics. And then finally, we've got the Sunday Times there. They've got a big story on defence procurement failures, pages and pages inside about failures in our defence system, and again, rugby on the front page. So much to talk about, but we're going to start with George Parker, talking about the Tory revolt on Brexit. You've got a story from the Mail on Sunday, George.
Yeah, that's right. The Mail on Sunday says May faces Tory revolt over cliff-edge Brexit. And of course, Theresa May got this huge majority last week in the House of Commons when the bill got its second reading, but it's back in the Commons this week. There's going to be a big bust-up. I think Anna may well be involved in this. But the Mail on Sunday saying that basically you're going to be putting down an amendment or supporting an amendment which basically says that Theresa May needs to come back to Parliament for parliamentary consent if she wants to walk away from the negotiating table.
Deal. It's this end game and it's the no deal. So PM's been absolutely clear. If she gets a deal, she'll bring it back to the House of Commons, in fact, to both chambers. And there will be votes, and rightly so, and a debate and so on and so forth. But if there's no deal, then the government will determine what happens next. And I think it should come into Parliament. I don't know why people are so fearful of that.
So this would give Parliament, right at the end of the process, the chance to say, do you know what, we don't like this deal. I guess the danger for the Prime Minister is that if Parliament rejects the deal, she has lost all her authority. It's very late to go back and plead for a better one.
If I may say, that's if we get a deal, and the PM's been clear, she will do those things. Yeah. This is about if there's no deal. And our fear is that if there is no deal before the 2 years is up, and look, let's be honest about this, we're not really going to start these negotiations until the conclusion of the French elections and then the German elections. Right. And so this won't, in 18 months, she's got to get a bespoke deal on trade, customs, security and EU citizens. We think that will be very difficult. And in the event of no deal, we want Parliament to decide what happens next.
You see, a lot of people will suspect that this is an attempt to stay inside the EU by the back door.
These are these mad conspiracy theories that people really have to get real. Last week, overwhelmingly, members of Parliament, like me, voted for us to leave the European Union. That is the reality. I've never said anything otherwise. I always said, like all Conservatives, I would honour the result, and that's what we are doing. And we're the only party that is united on that.
Suzanne Evans, UKIP is very suspicious about this process, aren't you?
Well, I think, Anna, first of all, well done for voting with the government last week. I'm very glad. I hope you keep up that good work. The people have voted to leave. And I'm with Theresa May on this. A no-deal situation where we revert to WTO trading rules is going to be far better than a bad deal that's going to be coming from Brussels. And you talk, and again, the Mail uses the phrase, going over this cliff edge. There are so many countries out there who are not in the single market, who don't even have a trade deal with the European Union, but I don't see them thrashing around at the bottom of the cliff, gasping for breath to save their lives. Many of them are actually doing incredibly well.
No deal is not.
I do talk to British business, and what I'm really pleased about, Anna, is as I'm seeing actually British businesses increasingly becoming much more positive. Even the CBI, straightforward Remainers, absolutely pushed for the Remain agenda, and now actually coming around to this idea that Britain has a brighter future outside the European Union.
That's different from cliff edge, and I don't think you'll find the CBI wants us to
a cliff edge.
Let me move away briefly from the White Cliffs to the other part of this whole thing, of course, was about immigration and the promise that we'd have control over immigration, and the clear implication would be that it would come down a lot. And Suzanne, you've got a story from yesterday's Guardian. Stephen Crabb, former cabinet minister.
Some cross-party consensus on this. Stephen Crabb, the Tory MP, is urging Theresa May to guarantee the status of EU nationals already resident in Britain. And I'm absolutely in agreement with that, and so is UKIP. Nobody at any point during the Leave campaign suggested that EU nationals would be in any way affected by Brexit. they must have the right to stay here. EU nationals came here in good faith, expecting to be able to stay, and that's the way it should stay. And as UKIP's NHS champion, I'm particularly concerned about EU workers in the National Health Service.
Absolutely.
Because they are very important, and yet already we're seeing some fear there, and indeed there are fewer nurses coming to Britain now since the referendum vote. We have to get this sorted now. Theresa May should take the moral high ground and say, yes, you can stay.
I think she has actually said that. It's just that...
Well, she hasn't.
There's no suggestion that there will be deportations or anything like that going on. But can I ask you, I mean, the other thing that Stephen Crabb says is this promise that we're going to get rid of immigration, it's going to come way down, is for the birds, that our economy is dependent upon immigration and it's going to carry on whether we're inside the EU or outside the EU. George?
Yes, I mean, one of the things Stephen Crabb says in this article is that students shouldn't be included in the migration figures.
Right.
I was at a seminar yesterday attended by hundreds of Chinese students who are studying in British universities, some really bright kids who are having to go home the moment they finish their degrees. I mean, these people would be brilliant for the British economy, but because they're included in the migration figures, they're sent home.
So we need to be really honest, and we need to have a proper debate, and it'll always be interesting to see at the end when we leave the EU, Suzanne, whether or not we have fewer, more or the same number of immigrants. The only way you have less is by trashing our economy, which undoubtedly, unfortunately, makes that
bringing us further on, this is an issue which has divided the Labour Party as well.
I mean, I think my party actually is pretty much, we are together. It's only Ken that voted against, of course, last week, and for understandable reasons. But my goodness me, what a mess the Labour Party is in. We have this...
She said happily.
No, I'm actually not.
No?
Because we need a good, strong opposition. It's good for democracy. But I mean, it is farcical what is happening. So Diane, who was taken terribly poorly and actually couldn't vote, even though there were people with very serious cancers who did come in and vote. We see them, they are all over the place. And we should be in no doubt whatsoever about these huge fractions within Labour.
There are about a dozen Labour MPs who defied Jeremy Corbyn last week who are waiting to find out whether they're going to be sacked, including Clive Lewis, who's one of his main lieutenants. Now, you could end up in a situation where he's scrabbling around to try and find someone to sit in the shadow cabinet.
Clive Lewis matters in particular because so many Labour MPs see him as a future leader.
They do, and people say that he may quit as a prelude to some future leadership bit, but to be frank,
they are
that's some way up.
Mess.
We're having a sweepstake in office about who you might put in the shadow cabinet. Maybe El Gato, the cat, could be...
Yes, it could end up like that.
Can we just be clear that in the week ahead what's going to happen is a whole series of amendments about EU citizens that Suzanne was talking about, but also the vote at the end of the process that we talked about at the beginning, and many more will be put down, and then we will see whether this piece of legislation is the same as it came into the Commons with, or very, very different.
I think one of the things people have to remember is that the bill is what I call a vehicle to deliver the result of the referendum. It's not about the contents of it. So we'll have to see which amendments actually fall within scope.
Are accepted.
And there could be very few, actually.
OK, now let's move on to Trump. George, you're having a story from The Observer at some point there about there's lots and lots of Trumpery all over the papers today.
Yeah, I mean, the papers are sort of picking apart the sort of dramatic last few weeks.
And we've just heard this suggestion that his appeal against this judge in Washington state who wanted to stop the ban on migrants has failed. I don't know what stage it's at, but it looks like this is a really, really big confrontation that at the moment he seems to be losing. Between
the president and the so-called judges, as he refers to them. And it's an incredible thing. And in fact, you know, the judges are seen by Trump as part of this liberal conspiracy, which is reflected here by Harry Kunzru in The Observer, who's talking about the pain he feels and the fact he's checking Twitter in the middle of the night to see what might have happened, what the president might have tweeted out. And on the other side of the coin, and it's a double-page spread in The Observer, you've got John Daniel Davidson, who's saying, look, Trump is doing exactly what he said he was going to do. He's not a fascist. And there are people on the coast, the East Coast and the West Coast, the media elite, who just don't get it. As Kerry was saying, they should calm down about it all. Nonetheless, this is a huge issue for the British establishment because he's going to be coming here almost certainly in the summer for a big state visit. How is he received and so on. Nigel FARAGE is about the only big figure in British politics who has been a resolute supporter of Trump all the way through, Suzanne, but he's on the front page for other reasons as well. And you've got some trouble with your man in the Stoke by-election. Can we explain this? Because Paul Nuttall, your new leader, has got a nice house in Stoke with no furniture,
a mattress on the floor, and it seems a very bizarre story, but it's quite a serious one, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure it is. I think the Labour and perhaps Channel 4 have been medal making here a little bit. The tenants, as I understand it, the tenancy agreement on this house was signed some weeks ago. But as we all know, when we're renting a new house, it can take some time to fully move in. But as far as I'm aware, there was furniture in the house. I think Michael Crick looked through the letterbox, but of course what's in our hallways is not necessarily indicative of what's in the rest of the house. Yes, he is. Yes,
really?
absolutely.
How long has he been living there?
I think he moved in whatever last week.
When he got
day.
selected.
I'm not sure. Well, he's never pretended to be local born and bred. So that's why I think
why has he got this house there?
Well, why not? Because he's on the campaign trail every day. Of course he's going to be there.
I was going to ask George, why is this an important story, or is this an important story?
Well, it's an important story in the sense that if he's masquerading to be something that he isn't, and if he's broken any electoral rules,
but the
then that's
police are involved at this point, aren't they?
I think.
Oh, but anyone can report something to the police, as you know.
I don't think it's a big deal.
It doesn't necessarily mean
you've
there's
also
anything in it.
picked the front page of the Express with Lord Carey.
Yeah,
He writes in the Express quite a lot.
I think this is quite interesting because, of course, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Carey, it was one of the more conservative, with a small c, evangelical archbishops that we have. And he's saying today that there's been this hysteria over President Trump. And I kind of agree with him, talking about the demonstrations that we've had. He says, I can't recall such demonstrations against terrible autocratic regimes such as Burma, Sudan and North Korea. It seems to be one of the key characteristics of those who consider themselves progressive to reserve condemnation for America, the West or Israel, and ignore much greater evildoers. He says, you know, when it comes to the world's worst politician, there are several other candidates who can trump Trump.
This, Suzanne, might be because we hold the Americans to higher standards. We expect more of them, and therefore it's more of a shock when we see this kind of.
Well, I think that's right. But, you know, and people want to criticise Trump. Absolutely. I've got no problem with that. But all this talk about preventing him coming to the country, he's not allowed to meet MPs in Westminster Hall. I think really, if you've got problems with somebody, the last thing you want to do, somebody who is showing a view that is perhaps less internationalist than you might like it to be, the last thing you do is match their standards. I think we should be welcoming him and making our values clear.
He doesn't meet MPs in Westminster Hall.
It's a very special. Did Obama speak there?
No, it's a very very special occasion, which is reserved for people who have done have had great achievements in their leadership. So they address
Westminster. Too early in the leadership for him to be asked.
He can go somewhere else within Parliament. I think it's the Royal Gallery, which is the alternative. Westminster Hall is, in my opinion, should be for the great leaders.
There is talk about a boycott,
and he's not
isn't
a great
there?
leader.
Would you
He's
go,
only been
Anna?
in.
Would you go watching?
I'm not sure I would. I think the one thing about Trump is, what does he want and crave most? And that's attention. He's like a little spoilt child. And I think there's much to be said about actually just not giving him all of this stuff, because he just loves it. And he's the sort where really just ignoring often could be the best thing.
Yeah,
what we shouldn't ignore is what he does. And what he's done with this executive order, this executive ban, is outrageous, and it's hugely offensive, and it has no basis, in fact, in any event.
Well, except it's carrying on from Obama's previous policy as well, in that it was, I understand it was Obama who first identified these countries.
He didn't ban
because they were,
we need to move on to one other story at
cooperating,
least, which is the transport story, actually.
Oh, yes, indeed.
Which is, the Sunday Times has done it. The Transport Select Committee produced this report overnight, too late for most of the papers.
Yeah.
But it basically says that the Department of Transport is not fit for purpose in handling the franchises that then control the British railway system.
Yeah.
Can you explain any more about this? Because it's quite a technical issue, isn't it?
Well, it's a technical issue. I mean, and it's mixed up with the Southern Rail dispute, which has brought privatisation into disrepute. And the argument of the Select Committee is that the Department of Transport simply can't cope with the complexity of negotiating these really difficult contracts with a whole host of private sector companies. And Chris Grady, I'm sure, will be defending the system in the future. The one thing I would say, I think there's sort of a false nostalgia around how brilliant the railways were in the era before privatisation. And the one thing that these nostalgias often overlook is the fact that since privatisation, rail passenger numbers have actually doubled.
Well, we've got a lot more to talk about this. We've run out of time here. I'm sorry, but thank you much, all of you.